All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Stevenson, and before I jump in here, I'm going to share in the chat a link to a PDF of my slides in case you'd like that, and I will share it at the end as well. All right, so as you've heard, I am the librarian for education at Vanderbilt University, and in that role, I do a lot of different things, as many of us do. I meet with students one-on-one. I am the subject liaison for teaching and learning and our Department of Leadership, Policy, and Organization. So I meet with students from all different backgrounds, from all different places in their sort of educational journey. I really do a lot of different things. But what I'm really passionate about is those one-on-one consultations with students and thinking specifically about how we can make that experience better for our students. So if you haven't already, I will say grab a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you need. Be sure to take care of yourself during this session. It is recorded, so my slides are available, so do what you need to take care of yourself during this session as well. Where we're going today, first we'll talk about just a general philosophy of this idea of compassionate research consults. So how do we have empathy while we are meeting with students, and what does that look like? And then I'll go into discussing a framework that you can apply in your context for doing those research consults in the virtual world with adult learners. So we all have sort of been in this space for the last year of doing online life. And for me, that has just been a continuation because a lot of my students, especially the ones who use the service of research consults, they are online students. They're either hybrid or fully online. And sort of one of the things that inspires me or has sort of led me down this journey was my own experience as a graduate student. I was a hybrid, but mostly online student. And it was really challenging, even as an LIS grad student, to know how to use the library at the institution I worked at. So my philosophy is driven by this idea that whatever we can do to make the library come to those students, to make it visible for them, that's what I'm about. All right, so in the chat, I'm just curious to kind of get a sense of where the room is at. How often do you conduct virtual research consultations? Is that a couple times a week, a month? How often do you find yourself meeting with students over Zoom or Teams? And then the second is, how confident do you feel doing those virtual research consultations? When we kind of made this shift, we had librarians say, I'm not prepared for this. I'm used to meeting with students at the reference desk, and now you're asking me to do this in Zoom one-on-one. Like, how's this going to go? Do you feel like you were prepared for that? So I'm going to read just some of the things that I'm seeing in the chat. We have every day. Yep. It's my life, 2 to 5 times a week, a couple times a month. During the semester, 5 to 6 a week. Yep. More if midterms and finals are coming up. I definitely feel that. Anytime there's a project, I feel like it sort of ebbs and flows with what the students are working on, for sure. Not super confident, but it's gotten better. Yeah, practice. Several times a month, I'm fairly comfortable. Some of us do chat, so you've gotten kind of used to working in that virtual space. I like knowing ahead of time what students' questions are. Yeah, we will talk about that for sure. More frequently during COVID. Mm-hmm. Yes, I definitely have felt that. All right. Some of you said, I love virtual consults. And yes, I do too. I'm with you. I love virtual teaching, and I'm love meeting with students online. There's some things that you can do with it that are different than what you can do when you're meeting with someone face-to-face or even at the reference desk. Great. Well, thank you all for your participation in that. So first, I want to talk about philosophy of compassionate research consults. And just to break down the title of this session a little bit, generally we think of LIS as a science. It's a part of our degree, but I believe that there's something artistic that takes place in this space when we're meeting with students. There's something that's adaptable about it. It's unique, and it's highly contextual. You know, each student that meets with us is an individual, and they bring, different experiences than the other ones. So really, with every student we meet, we're creating something unique with them. And so at a recent ACRL 2021 actually session, I attended this great session by LIT2021 called The Emergent Pedagogy of Presence and Care, Affect in Information Literacy Instruction. And she was sharing about emergent strategy and kind of how this applies to the instruction sessions. And I believe, and you'll see throughout this presentation, that I believe these consults really are kind of a micro instruction session, if you will. She said, I believe there's a conversation in the room that only these people at this moment can have. Find it. And that really resonates with me, because when we're meeting with students, that is a unique conversation that only myself and that student can have, or that small group of students can have. So going with this definition of art, it's an expression or application of human creative skill and imagination. When we are hosting research consultations, we are inviting students into a co-creation space. Let me say that again. When hosting research consultations, we are inviting students into a co-creation space. Just like with instruction, we take on different personas as librarians. So yesterday we heard a really great talk about the idea of the librarian as coach. And I thought that was a really interesting way to think about what we're doing when we meet with students. That's a persona that you could take on as a librarian meeting with a student, sort of help motivate them. We all bring a different sort of way of being to the space of meeting with students. And there's a lot of emerging research about the role of librarians in engaging with students in empathetic ways or caring ways. So a recent ACRL publication, Student Wellness and Academic Libraries, Case Studies and Activities for Promoting Health and Success. This is a really great book. I encourage you to take a look at if you haven't seen it. If you're interested in exploring this idea of how librarians can care for students and be empathetic, how we can really tend to the holistic student, and our role as librarians in retention, in student success. So I love this quote by Melissa Bowie in that book. She says, applying these concepts in the space of an individual research consultation can lead to powerful learning in which two people are connected and growing together. The librarian is taken out of an authority role, and two participants can create space to co-learn. And I will say this rings true. When I meet with students, they teach me so many things about how to be a better librarian, but also how to think about finding information, what their lived experience is. That teaches me things that I wouldn't have, I don't experience in my own world. So it's really great when we meet with students to put ourselves in their shoes and listen and hear about their lives. So I want us to reflect on throughout the rest of this time this question: what kind of space are you inviting students to join you in? A lot of times when we're going throughout our day, it can be easy to just be like, oh, got another consult, jump in. But if you sit back and take some time to think about what is the environment you're setting up for your students, what do you want that experience to be like for them? That's a really helpful thing to kind of pause and reflect, say, all right, do this with intentionality. how much power and agency do you give to your students to determine where the conversation is going to go in that space? All right. So with that, thinking about research consults, the reality is we are meeting with another human. So I am of the mindset and philosophy that my consultations are hopefully, I try and strive for this to be human-centered, meaning that it should center on the student, their identities and experiences that they bring when they show up. And we should reflect on how this shapes the student's research and overall academic experience and adapt our approach to meet their needs. It's really an act of hospitality to, instead of coming to this meeting saying, here are the things that we're going to accomplish, here's what I want you to learn, I have all this knowledge, but to say, all right, take a step back. What do you need to know? What will help you be successful? What's your experience been like so far in this program? How can I make it better for you? How can I help? It's a different mindset to come to that conversation with this framework. Have empathy and compassion for the unique human experience lived by the person you are meeting with. So in my time as a librarian, I have found that students come with all different things. And especially, I'll talk more about this, but the population of students I work with largely are graduate and doctoral students. And they have so much, they carry so much, they have so much life experience that they've already had, they've lived, they're in their careers, so they are busy. They have families they're taking care of. Sometimes they're taking care of an adult relative. They're caregivers. They are just doing so many things. And so it is helpful to remember that when you're coming to meet with them, that they bring something with them, or a lot of some things with them. Sometimes there's things going on. Last year was a whole year, like many years in one. And there were so many things going on. And those things going on in the world affect the students we're meeting with. So they may show up to the space, not only dealing with all the things that are going on in their personal life, but also just feeling the weight of things going on in the world. So it's just something to bring to your conversation is empathy for them and what they're going through. So I love this definition by Brene Brown of empathy. Empathy is a way to connect to the emotion another person is experiencing. It doesn't require that we have experienced the same situation they're going through. I really love that, because there's no way we can possibly have been through or have had the same experiences as students, as every student that meets with you. But it's helpful when you're talking with them to find those ways to connect with them, or if nothing else, to just listen and say, wow, to validate their experience. Wow, that's a lot. So any way that you can do that is really great. You don't really know what the student that's coming to meet with you brings. And so they may be feeling imposter syndrome. We see that a lot. Some signals that they may be feeling that way. They may say things like, wow, I'm so sorry to bother you, or like, I'll try to keep this short, or, oh, I should have known this, but I don't, so I needed to reach out to you. And those are all indicators that the student is feeling maybe a sense of imposter syndrome about doing the research. So when I meet with students, I try to say, oh no, this is literally what I'm here for. I am here to help you. Whatever I can do to help you get to the next step, that's what we'll talk about today. So really validating where they are in their research journey and letting them know they're not alone, because like all the students I meet with say the same things. It's like a pattern, especially I would say with this population. They don't tend to think that they know everything. And so, or they're very willing to admit, like, I need help to get through this program. So what can you help? What can you do? So it's just something to keep in mind. So I love this quote again from the case for the empathetic librarian. By participating in mutual empathy, students who seek help from a librarian who make themselves vulnerable when asking for help might find unexpected space where they receive a bit of affective care, and perhaps that will promote a greater sense of well-being. Another book that I recommend, if you are interested in thinking about how to think about this in a new way, is reference librarianship and social justice. So thinking about, how does our work intersect with creating just spaces for our students, that kind of thing. I love this quote from Eamon Toole that says, "As we are demanded to demonstrate our value," we all been there, "and prove our contributions, perhaps the most useful thing reference workers can do is embrace the fleeting and unexpected nature of reference. Let's use our positions in reference to foster solidarity with our patrons and create meaningful connections. Most significantly of all, let's use our time and energy to give attention to and care for others in a time when care is an uncommon, essential, and radical act." I love that. When we're meeting with students, sometimes that might be the only time we meet with them. It's fleeting. Sometimes it's just a quick 20-minute conversation, and then we may not talk to them again. How can we use that position to convey care for the student? So what I think this looks like in practice is a few things. Checking your own biases and assumptions and norms. So what might be your personal experience of normal, how to go about doing the research process, what sources to trust. Maybe your access to the internet is going to be different than your students. So just thinking about that is an important aspect of doing this well. Second is be flexible and adaptable to student needs. So, for example, I meet with a lot of students who are international students who are attending class at 2 a.m, their time, and then scheduling research consults with me right after it. So I always am like, oh my goodness, it's 3 a.m. Why are you meeting with me now? They're like, oh, well, I'm already awake. And that's a different experience than mine was in graduate school. So thinking about how I can maybe offer to send them a recording of that time or a transcription of that time that we have together so that they can read it afterwards, in case they were not fully attentive at that time. There's different ways that we can adapt to our students' needs. Again, thinking about how a lot of students that we meet with have lots of things that they're doing. I like to provide a lot of different opportunities for them to meet with me. I always emphasize when I'm teaching, you can email me, you can call me, you can schedule an appointment. And a lot of them email me, but not everyone. A lot of students also want that face-to-face time just to be reassured, I think, by my presence and discuss this thing with me more. And so making sure that I offer some flexibility in when I meet and don't just say, come to my office hours, but have a variety of times when they can meet. And I'll show you how I do that in a little bit here. Finally, recognize the student's bravery in reaching out to you and affirm that they are not alone. So again, it was a brave thing of them to reach out, and it's a vulnerable thing for them to reach out and say, hey, I need some help. So whatever you can do to recognize that and say, hey, thanks for meeting with me. Yes, I'm hearing that question a lot from your classmates, or, yeah, a lot of people feel that way when they come back to school after a break. There's a lot that you have to kind of catch up on in the ways of things, but you can do it. You can do it. That's what I like to assure students of. So as a definition of research consultations, I've pretty much talked about this now, but I like to think of it in terms of information consultations when we recommend, interpret, evaluate, or use information sources to help others meet a particular need. And these can take place, like I've said, in the virtual space. So a lot of us serve, in a reference desk position, or, we are used to meeting with students in our offices or over email, but really online is kind of a unique thing. It's electronic, so some of us do chat, but then also we're meeting with students over Zoom or Teams, doing that video conferencing to connect with them. And then just a quick definition of adult learners. They come to the library with a wealth of life experiences and knowledge, goal-oriented, focused on meaningful lessons and achievable goals, and they are motivated to learn. I think that's really key to think about. I always get the sense when I'm meeting with doctoral students, especially, like, don't waste my time. I have things I need to know. You hold information I need, so let's get to it. So some students will jump right into that, and we'll talk about it a little bit. But generally, the students I work with are students who it's been a while since they've been in school. There are a handful that have gone straight through to their doctoral degree or to their master's degrees, but quite a few, especially in the Doctor of Education programs, they are in a space of either mid-career wanting to sort of advance, or they are have done some soul searching over the last year and are wanting to go in a new direction. So that's when a lot of them choose to join one of the doctoral programs I work with. So they're very motivated. All right, so let's move on to a framework for compassionate research consults. So this has sort of developed over the years for me through my experiences working with students, but also keeping that sort of philosophy in mind of providing care for the whole student. And we'll talk more about it, but just kind of what that looks like in practicality. So the first step really is to set clear expectations. I cannot emphasize this enough. We do not have time to do everything. None of us do. You should not be on your email all hours of the day and night. We need to have some space in our lives for other things. So what's really helpful for me is to set clear expectations with the students, to let them know what it is I offer, and what that's going to look like. Now, in that space, we are flexible and adaptable to what they need, but I do set some clear parameters for what I do and what they're going to need to do as to be successful in their program. And to do this, it's important to have consistent messaging about what you do and how you support students in all the places where you're communicating. So my background is in outreach and marketing as a librarian. And so thinking about not just what I teach, when I go to an instruction session, I tend to spend some time setting it up for the students, say, here's what I do. I'm available to help support you in your research process and get to the next step. So email me, call me, set up a one-on-one time to meet with me. But what I will do in that space is help you strategize. I am not going to do your lit review for you. I'm not going to do your capstone for you. I'm not your personal research assistant, but I am here to help you get to the next step. I find that's very important because, again, we are all working with tons of students, and we have to be able to also take care of ourselves. And so I'm pretty upfront with the students about what it is that I'm going to do, and that I'm their partner in this, that I'm going to help them. So I think that's really helpful. One thing to note too is you want your outreach programs and your marketing materials to also reflect that messaging. So for us at Vanderbilt, we have what we call personal librarians. So my students in the programs that I work with know that I am their librarian. They know that I am here for them. And, when they start their program, I'm at most of their orientations saying, hey, you'll see me later, but I just want you to see my face, especially for those online students. It's helpful for them to recognize me. So, in our outreach, in our marketing, personal librarians, we also emphasize ask us. If you have a question, just ask. That's kind of our slogan for reference librarians. And so I emphasize that when I'm teaching. I say, no question is off limits when it comes to research. So feel free to ask, send me an email. We want to be consistent. The other way that you can do this is, and I think I saw someone in chat mention this, but it's ask for the information you need prior to the appointment. So some of us are really great at on the fly, jumping in like, oh, let's strategize your research. Here's the database you need to go to. Here's the keywords I'd recommend based on the, vocabulary in this database. But not all of us are like that. And so I find it really helpful to ask the students in the booking form, what are you working on? What course are you a part of? So that I can prepare mentally for what it is that they're going to be asking me about. Now, sometimes, as we know, we do reference interviews, and sometimes what they think they need is not what they end up needing. But at least I have a sense of what the topic is that they are interested in, or just even like where we are going. What program you're in. That for me makes a big difference. If I at least know what course we're in, I can have a general sense of like, oh, that's probably going to be this project. I know the requirements of that project. So it's helpful to ask for that information up front. So this is my form. We use LibCal booking system. There's many different ways you can do this, but the nice thing about LibCal is it is a little customizable, so I can kind of set this boilerplate information for the student, what I'm available for, just kind of re-emphasizing that, letting them know they can also email me if none of the times on here work for them. But yeah, it's that's a great way to just sort of introduce like, hey, you clicked on this button, now here's what it means. The second part of the form, I ask them for their name and email, their program. If they know their class, I'll have them put that. And then I have this as a mandatory form field to put in your research topic or question. And that I get limited. Sometimes they'll put in like everything. They'll put in their abstract of what they're working on. Sometimes it'll be like, I want to know more about special education. So, it kind of varies as far as the success with having that on my form. But at least I get a general idea for the most part of where they want to go, what they're hoping to learn. And there's lots of ways you could do this. You could have a question that says like, what do you hope to learn from this appointment, or something like that. This could be phrased many different ways. All right. So the second part of my framework is create a safe environment to connect. I've seen a lot of research in librarianship about brave spaces, making sure that students are cared for and respected, and how to kind of set that up. So here are just a couple ways in practicality that you can do this. The first thing is to think about the setup. How are you setting up the space in the virtual world for the student? Design matters. So when I meet with students in person, this is a picture of my office. My desk is over to the right, but I have this table where I hope and I try to signify to the students, I'm here to meet side by side with you. I'm going to partner with you. And it allows them to choose where they want to sit. Sometimes students want to sit with their back to the corner, and I totally understand why. And so I'm like, do that. It is open. Choose your spot at this table. But that can be a little bit more tricky in the digital space to set up that safety for the student. So I like to, in my Zoom settings, make the camera optional at startup. So instead of forcing them to like turn off their camera when they've joined, I like to give them the option to choose like how they want to meet with me before they've even entered the Zoom. The other thing that I like to do is give students a little bit of agency. And so I allow them to share their screens. So it's not just me like showing them and demonstrating to them what to do. Some students will say like, oh, Sarah, can I show you what I'm working on? And I'm like, yes, that's great. Actually, let's do that. Some other things you can do, offer to send your recording links transcription to the students. I think someone in the chat said they do this. I love that. You have students who that might be helpful for, to be able to review what you've talked about after the fact, to go through that. I have a lot of language learners in my program, so that is a really helpful thing for them to be able to see the transcription and review it. The other thing I would say is we love our Zoom backgrounds. I love Zoom backgrounds, but I think in this space, it's helpful to convey a sense of calm. So I like to provide a simple background, you can see my office is very plain. My office that is behind me is very simple as well, just because I want to limit the number of distractions, but also the reality is color conveys things psychologically, and in different cultures, color can mean different things. So I think it's helpful to just kind of provide that space in a sort of simple way. The second part of this is in your conversations. How can you create a safe-ish space in your conversations? And we've talked about this a little bit already, but really listen compassionately or with empathy. You know, you may not be able to understand everything that they're going through, and that's okay. But affirming them in that experience is important. I will say, don't force vulnerability. Not every student is going to self-disclose, and that's okay too. I have some students who like hop into Zoom and they're like, okay, let's go. Here's my research question. And they just like start going, and that's okay too. I think it's an important distinction for us to remember that we are not licensed therapists as well. And so there is a limit to what we should be doing to support students, in the sense that we should do the work to be prepared to refer. So whatever your campus has as far as services for students goes, you should go through. I always opt for the training to know what signs to look for students in distress. Sometimes you'll have students disclose things that you need to report. So just be as trained as you possibly can be in this way to be able to refer and connect students with the resources that will help them. We are in a space right now where students have unprecedented numbers of mental health challenges. And so it's important to be aware of the signals that they may need help, and to help guide them and connect them if you are able to. The other thing I would say is do not stay if you are unsafe. So I feel like this needs to be said because we have a tendency to just do whatever we need to do for the patrons. But there is sometimes a need to take care of yourself. And so it's important for your library to have a policy about this because you are in a vulnerable one-on-one interaction. And so making sure that you are safe in that, I think, is important. So if your library doesn't have a policy about this, that's something maybe to suggest to your administration. And then finally, be aware of what you need to do to decompress after. So I do these sessions for 30 minutes at a time. And I usually schedule a buffer in between them of 10 minutes, which isn't a lot of time, but it's enough time for me to go, get water, get coffee, take a quick break. But then recognizing like the load of that is more than your typical time on email. So do what you need to do to take care of yourself after, because that process of empathy, listening and having compassion, that takes something from us. And so whatever you need to do to decompress is really helpful for really your own well-being. So some questions to get there. I like to start out my conversations, if they haven't come and said, here's what I want to do today. I like to ask these sort of open-ended questions. So how are you doing today? How is the course and program going for you? How are you feeling about this project or your research? Tell me more about what you're working on. So a lot of times they filled out that form and said, here's what I'm working on. But it can be helpful to have them sort of reiterate, because sometimes it's changed even since they've put in that booking. All right, in step 3, I would say set an intention together. And what I mean by this, some of you may be familiar with this idea of intention from mindfulness practice or practice of yoga, but this idea that we come to the space and we are kind of speaking a goal or an intention or something that we want to see in this time. So having some intentionality, I would say, about the time, but really doing that together is important. So because with students that I meet with, I try to keep it to 30 minutes. If I schedule them for an hour, they will take the hour. So I try to limit it to 30 minutes so I can get as many students as possible in there. So things that I'll ask, what do you hope to learn from this time together? We have 30 minutes scheduled. How do you want to spend the time? What do you need? What would be most helpful to you? How can I help you? These are just questions that sort of open the space and help you to set a goal together of where do we want to go by the end of this? What do you want to know? And this is probably one of the most important things to keep in mind as librarians, because we love our information and we love to share lots of it, is to respond to the information needs that are presented with relevant information literacy takeaways. We cannot possibly teach them everything they need to know. So typical research questions that I see: where do I get started? What database should I use based on my topic? How do I create a search? What keywords do I use? How do I know if I found everything I need? I have a lot of students that are working on literature reviews, and they're like, how do I know if I found all the people, all the voices? How do I know if the sources that I found are scholarly? These are just some of the questions that come up. And you'll notice some of these questions are very transactional. Like, oh, where do you get started? Here is the education database that you'd want to look in. What's your topic? Here's some ideas of keywords. Let's work on creating a search together. And then some of these things are more of what you might think of traditionally as an information literacy question. How do I know if I found everything I need? Or how do I know if the sources are scholarly? These are things that can be answered by the frameworks for information literacy. Having a brief conversation about how to identify scholarly sources might be what this student needs to know. When they're thinking about, have I found everything I need? That might be a really good space to say, well, you're writing a literature review, and so you're finding out what the conversation has been to set up the context for your addition to that conversation. So thinking about scholarship as conversation. That's a very short explanation, but that is a bite-sized information literacy talk to say, here's a piece of the framework that is really applicable to your question, what you're wanting to know. So in this, be aware of cognitive load. So we know from psychology that people only have a certain amount that they can store in their working memory. And so you can't, again, show them everything that you would show in a 1 hour, one-shot session. So I like to emphasize getting the student to the next step in their process. And I'll talk about this in a minute, but I always invite follow-up because I know that they may have more questions as a result of that, of our conversation. But I like to help them move on to whatever is next, whatever that looks like for them. All right. So as I said, providing that bite-sized thing that they can take away, whatever they're asking, sometimes there's this information literacy frame that kind of is underpinning their question. So sometimes it's just going to be transactional, and you're going to say, well, here's the database you need to use. And let's talk about your research. What have you tried so far? Can you show me what you've tried so far? Or let's work together to create a search in this database and walk them through it on their screen. This is a really great time to kind of back and forth demonstrate, but have them show you that they can do it. Now, not every student wants to learn that way, and so don't force that on them. Some students will want to just take notes on every word you say and write it down and review it later, and that's okay. But if they're open to it, having them try it is really effective at helping that kind of get embedded in their memory if they've walked through those steps themselves. All right. So once you've had this conversation, you've talked about, what they need to know, you've helped them to kind of clarify what the next step is for them. That's a great time to revisit the intention, to say, okay, here's what we were hoping to accomplish. Did we make it? Did we get there? So some questions to ask. Again, I like to to structure my research consults as a series of questions more than me talking at the person. How are you feeling about your project now? Do you feel like you have what you need to take the next step? Is there anything else you need to know to move forward? Or, is there anything else I can show you? Do you have any questions about what we've talked about so far? And these are just really good things to pause and ask them and have them reflect and say, okay, do I feel confident moving forward or not? If not, if you're out of time, you may need to schedule another time to meet unless you have, room in your schedule. You could also offer to send a follow-up email with the links you've shared or talked about, or write out the strategy that you've used. There's a lot of different things that you can do depending on what the student needs. And then finally, invite follow-up conversation. And this can be a little scary because you don't know how much the student is going to reach out to you in their time in their program. Last week, I had a student reach out to me that I had just met in their orientation. I was like, oh man, they have 3 years. Am I going to hear from them every month? I actually had a student last week email me and she was like, can you believe it's been 3 months since we've talked? I was like, yeah, we talk a lot. But it is important, I think, to offer that next step for them. And sometimes that means having follow-up conversation. Not every student is going to take you up on this. Some are going to say, I think I've got it, and they can go from there. If you show that you are willing to answer their questions, they will also tell other people. So you will find that word of mouth advertising, especially for students who are in a cohort model. They will tell their fellow cohort members and you'll start to see more people show up. So it's important to be kind and to keep the conversation going when it's needed. So being available is important. All right, so just to recap the framework for you, it's important to set clear expectations, create a safe environment to connect, set an intention, respond to information needs with relevant information literacy takeaways, revisit that intention, and then invite follow-up conversation. So I want us to take just a moment in chat to answer these questions. And the first is, what is something you do to foster a brave space for students meeting with you online? And I know some of you have been kind of sharing, which is really great. That's why I love to see us kind of brainstorm together. And then what is something you do to convey empathy or compassion for students meeting with you online? So I'll take a moment to give you a chance to think about that, and feel free to throw that into the chat. Fostering a brave space. Let's see here. I point out when something doesn't work for me and talk through how I might change my strategy. Ooh, that's really good. Someone said I show things that I wouldn't necessarily show to non-dissertation students, to my doctoral students. Yep. Begin with a check-in, how they're feeling or doing that day. I love that. Acknowledge that it's a space to be brave and it's okay to make mistakes. Ooh, that's good. Yes. Yes, there isn't a right way, dare I say, to do it. So when I teach, I often will say that there isn't a magical way to do this research. It's a process, and it's going to look different for each student. Ooh, I let them know I'm taking notes that I can send to them. That's great. Modeling not having all the answers, taking time to listen. Yes, someone mentioned trauma-informed librarianship, and I think so too. Yes, this is very closely related to trauma-informed librarianship. Yep, give them the opportunity to talk about the challenges they've had so far. Mention no cameras are required. Sometimes I shut mine off as well so we can both focus. Yeah, I think asking them too, would this be helpful for you to see my face and follow along with what I'm saying? Or is it okay if I take my camera off too, so we can just look at the screen? Tell me how you're feeling about this assignment right now. Yep. Sharing struggles with research. Yeah, sometimes that empathy can go two ways, letting them see that you also were a student, you were a person that went through this process. You get it. That can be good. keeping a consultation journal. Leslie, my colleague, posted that. I think that's really great. So you can remember where they were, where you were when you talked to them. Mm-hmm. Yes, asking them, are you okay with me recording this to send to you later? That can be helpful because it goes fast and it can be hard to remember everything that was shared or every kind of step. A lot of students will say, oh, can you go back and repeat like how you got to this page or this website? So yeah, that's really good. All right, I saw someone was asking about the slides, so I'll share the link again to the PDF in chat for you all. And at this time, I think we'll move to the official, let me see, Q&A. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A and I will try to respond to as many as I can. And I will put my contact info up after we do this part so that you know how to get in touch with me as well. So someone asked in the chat, how do you navigate between asking questions about the student and not being seen as prying? That's a really good question because you don't want to be all up in their business, especially if they're not open to it. So I usually go with where they're going. So when a student shows up to Zoom, some of them will immediately say, we'll drive the conversation and they will say, hey, so here's what I need to know. And some of them, we start with a greeting and I'll say, hey, I'm Sarah. I know I may have met you in class, but there's a lot of students. And so it's nice to meet you. And then I will go into asking some open-ended questions. How's it going for you so far? How are you feeling about your program? And if they don't answer me, then I just move in like, okay, well, let's talk about what you need to know. And I'll sort of just move into the research part of our conversation. So I sort of just have to listen and notice how they are responding to me in that space. And I don't push them if they are like not interested in conversing about their personal life. I'm not going to make them. Someone said, has your approach to empathy-driven reference and instruction changed since you first started as a librarian? How so? That is a really good question as well. When I first started as a librarian, I spent most of my time meeting with students at the reference desk. At my previous institution, we had a reference desk and we were scheduled for hours there. And throughout my time at that institution, we started to see our numbers drop off. And also we noticed that students seemed really uncomfortable meeting with us in that public space. And so we started to ask ourselves those questions of like, why do we think our numbers are not like, why do we think students aren't meeting with us? And through that research, we did some study of that. We realized that we were holding on to this symbolic feature of our service, this desk, and it wasn't hospitable to students. It was like out in the middle of the library in this open public space. It was not conducive to having conversations. Some students didn't want to even disclose what they were researching while sitting with us out there in the middle of the library. So we adapted our service model to be personal librarians, and we started to advertise ourselves as librarians for specific programs. And we sort of shifted our whole approach to be more empathetic to the student experience. So I would say absolutely it's changed for me. I went from being a staunch supporter of the reference desk to, wow, I think that we can have something unique when we are hospitable and open up our spaces to meet with students. And so in that role, I was meeting with a lot of students one-on-one in my office. And now in my role, most of my consultations are over the virtual space. So yes, absolutely. And I think as we see more research on this idea of care and someone mentioned trauma-informed care of students, I think that it will continue. This is this is something that I am learning even still. I think you don't necessarily arrive, but you keep learning. And so, yes, for me, it has definitely grown. Any tips for managing virtual consultations with an unexpected group of students in the same class? One student scheduled it. Oh my goodness, that's hilarious. I have had this happen many times. I actually, one time, my first time actually that this happened, it was one of those like, oh no moments where I was very confused why the student showed up in my Zoom. And I was like, can I help you? And then he was like, oh, I'm part of the group that's meeting with you. And I was like, oh, my apologies. That probably sounded very rude. And so we had a very vulnerable moment of saying, all right, let's talk about your group project that I didn't know was a group project. So tips for managing that. I think it's helpful to know. So that might be something actually to add to your form, like ahead of time. Is this a group or just you? And then, I mean, I feel like it's almost even becomes like a mini instruction session with a small group of students. I sort of treat it the same way I would teach a class when I have 3 to 5 students meeting with me. And I offer the same things. It's like, I always feel like there's one student that kind of takes the lead and is like the person asking the question. So, excuse me, I will, if I notice someone else in the group that's not asking anything, I'll say, oh, did you have anything you wanted to add or anything that you have questions about? Because there usually will be a kind of dominant person in those groups. So that's one thing I'll do is kind of ask, the whole group around the names, oh, did you have anything you wanted to know? Anything else I can answer for you? Yeah, good questions. Did you offer online consultations before COVID? Yes. So most of my programs, at least the ones that are typically wanting to have a consultation, are either hybrid or fully online. I do have residential undergrads and residential graduate students as well. And some of them will want to meet with me online, but most of the ones that I meet with are online education, doctoral programs or PhD programs. So those students have been online, and I anticipate will continue to be online for the future. Because I've been at Vanderbilt only a year and a half, I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning, but I started at Vanderbilt in January of 2020. So you can all imagine what that has been like. So I anticipate that the numbers will probably continue to grow just as I continue outreach, virtual outreach to my programs. And as they kind of get the word out that they have a librarian now, I think that I'll probably see it continue. But definitely it's kind of been, there were online consultations before it started, and then they've just continued. Good questions. Anything else before we wrap up? I have probably time for one more question. I see, how do you help students with imposter syndrome? Yeah, that knowing the kind of indicators of imposter syndrome is helpful. So, when they show up saying things like, I probably should know this already, or sort of disparagingly, it's been a long time since I've been in school. I just like to encourage them and say that they're not alone, because they're not. There's a lot of students in that boat in their programs, and encouraging them that they can do it. And I think giving them, using this framework of getting them to the next step is really helpful. So it's not like I have to know everything right now, but what do I need to be successful with this particular thing at this moment, and assuring them that I'm there for them as questions come up down the line. So they don't have to never talk to me again. Like, I'm open to meeting with them again. Well, I just want to make sure I put up here my contact information. And again, this is in the slides that I've shared in the PDF, so you'll have that. I'm always open to talk more with anybody who's interested in this. I'm on Twitter as well, and I have my website there. But if this is something that interests you, I would love to chat more about it. I've been working on researching this for a while, and probably will eventually write about it. But I'm just so glad that you all joined me in talking about this really important topic. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me.